So am I going to? La 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 la. Oh. Good evening. Good evening. Oh, we gotta wait for Al to come in. There he is. Okay, now we can get started. Al's here. Okay. Good evening. My name is Bridget Young. I'm City Council Member, District 2, and it's my honor to be able to open up this fourth Land Use Forum for everybody who's here, but also please note that we have many people who are watching at home in the warmth of their home instead of being out here in the streets. So anyhow, it's my role tonight to welcome everybody, our speakers, our community dialogue series at the City of Sugar Land. We are proud of those of you within the community who has come to these and who have participated in our workshops afterwards. Before I get started, though, I wanted to introduce some of the important people who are here. We have Steve Porter, City Council Member, District 2. Have Joe Zimmerman, City Council Member at Large, Position 2. Alan Bogart, who is hiding in the back, is our City Manager. Anybody else? I think that's all our elected officials. And also we have a committee who is working on this, the Land Use Committee. Would you please stand up so we can recognize you? Yeah. And we have some of our other boards and commissions. I see some planning and zoning folks. So if you serve on another board or commission, please stand up. And Sue Sanchez, I'm going to call her out because she's being obstinate and will not stand up. Okay. Tonight is the fourth forum in the six-part series on land use. Our goal for this evening is to understand a range of housing choices available and the ways in which these might fit into our community. This will include a look at different design aspects that can help a development blend into the community and maintain value as it ages. Additionally, we will hear from a developer and a market expert on why a mix of different housing choices makes a development more resistant over the long run. So once again, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I would like to turn this over now to Christopher Spiegler, who of course is our consultant with Morris Architects. Christoph, excuse me. And Christoph is going to invite all of the people who are here tonight to speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council members have played a key role in this from the beginning. So, to introduce the forum tonight, we are going to have Julie Campoli as our first speaker. That will be followed by a panel discussion with Steve Spillette and Keith Simon. We will then have a Q&A, and for all of you here in the room, you should have gotten blue Q&A cards like this. Write your questions on those and pass them up. And otherwise, we're also taking questions by email, by Facebook, and by Twitter. So for everyone watching at home, there are a lot of ways to get your questions in. Or if you're in the audience and have messy handwriting, you can pull out your phone and tweet your question. And then following that, we are going to actually have an activity for all of you to be able to react to what you've seen tonight. And what you'll actually be able to do is do a visual preference survey. We'll show you different kinds of development, and you'll be able to respond to those. And that feedback is a really important part of this process. At forum number 1 in this series, we learned the changes in demographics and in market preferences, and we also learned how the tax base of a city like Sugar Land is impacted by land use decisions. At forum number 2, we talked about employment. We talked about how Sugar Land has attracted employers to the city, what employers are looking for in places to locate, and what kinds of buildings we build for employment has been changing over time. And we really learned how the city and developers can partner in developing the city. At forum number 3, we talked about successful activity centers like Town Square. We basically talked about the rules that make them work, what makes successful retail, what makes successful public spaces, how do buildings shape those public spaces, and really the changes in the retail market, how the places people shop today are different than the places where people used to shop. And that's been a consistent theme. As we're going through these forums, we're looking at what's changing. We know that a lot of things in Sugar Land will stay the same. This will always be a predominantly single-family residential city. But we also know that things are changing. And the question is, how as a city does Sugar Land respond to those changes? So those are our questions today. How is the market for housing changing? What are the benefits of mixing different housing options? And a really critical question, what causes some neighborhoods to decline while others hold their value? If you think around the Houston region, you can think of places like FM 1960 on the north side that have not done well over time, and you can think of other neighborhoods that have continued to thrive over time. And the question we're asking is, what can the city of Sugar Land do to put the city in the latter category, to make it a city that continues to thrive over time? So really, a lot of what we're doing today touches on that key question. And if you look at cities and you look at individual neighborhoods, you'll see that cities follow a kind of pattern. Initially, you start with a greenfield, undeveloped land on the outskirts, and then you enter a period of rapid growth. Sugar Land really started that rapid growth in the 1970s, and it's continuing as you look on the other side of the river. But then at some point, you're going to hit a peak. You're literally going to run out of land to develop. And Sugar Land is now at that peak point. That if you look within city limits and even the ETJ, the supply of undeveloped land is winding down. And as you hit that peak, a lot of things are happening. The people who moved in as the city was growing, they're aging. The houses that they live in are aging. The infrastructure that was built to support those houses is aging. And what you see is from that point, cities and neighborhoods can follow two very different paths. You will see that some decline, that infrastructure will continue to deteriorate, that the houses lose value, that residents move out and perhaps properties go rental, and you see the demographics of the neighborhood shift, and you'll see other neighborhoods which continue to gain in value. If you look in Houston, for example, an extreme example is West University Place, where as those original house ages, what happened instead is people came in and they built bigger and more expensive houses. So that West University sort of followed a path of actually strengthening over time. And the question is, what's the difference between those two kinds of neighborhoods? What causes some to strengthen and others to decline? One really key factor is location. We've talked about this in the context of Sugar Land. Sugar Land is successful because it is easy to get to jobs from here. Good neighborhood schools are a key factor in keeping those schools high quality. Public amenities, things like parks and hike and bike trails and community centers. And civic pride, which is actually a huge asset that Sugar Land has compared to a lot of other places. Being this small city that you can actually know people in as opposed to being just a tiny bit of the huge city of Houston makes a big difference in how people perceive their neighborhood. But then you can also look at what causes neighborhoods to decline. One of them is original residents aging and beginning to leave. If you have a neighborhood that was full of young families when it was first built, they're all getting old at the same time. So one thing you can do is try to find ways to keep them in the community. Houses are out of date. There's very little the city can do about that. But if it's a desirable place to live, people will keep updating those homes. Infrastructure reaches the end of its useful life. This can be really traumatic because if a city doesn't budget for this, all the roads and all the utilities wear out at the same time. The only thing you can do is raise taxes a lot to pay for fixing those, and at that point you're actually further harming the property value. So keeping on top of infrastructure, which is something that this city is doing. Public amenities wear out, things like parks. And often you'll see that commercial property tends to decline before residential, and that affects the surrounding property value. So redeveloping some of those commercial properties so they remain active and vital and attractive can really help the surrounding neighborhoods. And the other question is, if you're going to build new neighborhoods, what can you do to make sure they will hold their value over time? It's things like including good amenities. It's things like ensuring you have good connections to jobs and retail. It's things like including different kinds of housing options, including services in the neighborhood. You've got good restaurants around, you've got good stores around. Building robust infrastructure, things like low-impact development for stormwater that not only is more attractive, but will actually cost less to maintain over time. So that's really the key question today, and we've got a series of great speakers to talk about that. Julie Campoli has a practice in Vermont called Terra Firma Urban Design, and she works with nonprofits, with cities, public agencies, to really look at plans for development. And she's written a pair of amazing books. One of them is this one, Visualizing Density, which is literally a catalog of different ways to build cities. And her new one is actually on walkability. So please welcome Julie Campoli.
Thank you, Christoph. Do we have this? You're getting it up. Okay, well, I'll just take a few moments to say some thanks. First of all, I left Boston this morning, and I have to tell you, my heart just went aflutter when I saw the green grass around here. It's been a long, cold, hard winter, and it's just a thrill to be in a place. I know I've heard the weather's bad today, but it's all relative, right? Feels pretty good to me. I would love to thank Lisa and Amanda and Mandy and Christoph and Kathy for their tour of Sugar Land today. We got in a van and we drove all around the city for a couple of hours, and they have severely diminished the chances that I'll make some dumb outsider comments by all of the great information that they gave me. It was a really good chance to get a lay of the land. Right, okay, good. I'm really pleased to be invited to help Sugar Land plan as it plans for the future. And I've been asked to discuss different ways to design housing, and housing that will meet the needs of people in this town for many generations to come. I'm going to focus on building types, and then I'm going to focus on neighborhoods. And I'm going to talk about how to arrange the components of neighborhoods: streets, buildings, blocks, houses, parcels, how to put all those things together to create attractive, walkable places. Sorry, I gotta get that. So a few weeks, I guess about a month ago, Mitchell Silver stood here, and he made a very compelling case about that the real estate market is changing, and that the land use pattern that we have inherited from previous generations is probably not going to fulfill our needs for tomorrow. And Americans in general are changing their minds about what they want. Surveys say people still want single-family homes, but they're willing to have much smaller, less square footage in exchange for a more convenient neighborhood. And these trends are likely to play out in Sugar Land as well. Did I not turn this on? There we go. Okay. And like the rest of the U.S., Sugar Land has an aging population, and you see the bulge there in the middle-aged folks now. And as this bulge slips into as they reach their 70s and 80s, many of those people are going to be looking for much lower maintenance housing options, and they're going to be looking for more convenient locations to live in. And Sugar Land also has a smaller than usual amount of people under the age of 45. I think it's well below the national average, and that should be a area of concern. Because the millennials that might move here, they don't have the cash that their parents did at the same age, and they're less interested in moving to remote locations. I have 3 children who are 20-something. They went to really good colleges, and it's really hard to imagine them, in the job market today, getting together the down payment to buy a house. So, we want to make sure that people that age have a lot of housing options. And another thing to think about is that there's a growing disillusionment with this auto-dependent transportation system that we built up. It's not yielding the sense of fun and ease that seduced us in the 1960s. When was the last time you felt like this when you were driving down the road in your car? I mean, it was probably more like this. We're finding that taking every single trip in the car and all the hours of the day that we spend behind the wheels, it's just making us stressed out and unhealthy. And it would be really nice to have some options, some other ways to get around. So you've already figured out as a community what you want, and now is kind of the hard part. You have to decide what form that will take. And I would like to take this opportunity to help you visualize what exactly that means, a beautiful, inclusive, environmentally responsible community. And I would like to present the idea that putting people closer together, living close together, working close together, that's going to be the key to the great neighborhoods and superior mobility for the future. So I think that is what you have to keep in mind as you try to achieve this goal that you've set out. But first, let's talk about density. This is a really emotionally charged word. And it taps into a lot of people's fears. When you say this word, a lot of people conjure up this image in their heads. Maybe you have. If you haven't, then I'm sure you've talked to some people that have this in their mind when they think of density. This is sort of what you'd think would be on the set of the TV show The Wire. You know, horrible things happen in places like this. But the truth is, this is a failed experiment from the 1960s. We have not built housing projects like this in a generation, yet this image persists. And here's another image that comes to mind when people think of density. So maybe this is the Stepford Wives, you know, relentlessly monotonous, mass-produced housings that have, you know, no diversity, no break in the pattern. Or this one, the apartment building that ate the town, the Godzilla. But it's important to remember that these are the bad apples of density. Even though, you know, most density isn't like this, these are very powerful images and very negative ones. And they always seem to come to mind. And it's density discussions provokes a fear of change, and so people are kind of ready to go to this kind of negative image. But one thing that's important to remember is that people often consider that density equals crowding. But that's not the case at all. Those are two very different things. Density is just a fraction. It's a mathematical formula. It's the number of people divided by the area, the number of people in a given space. But crowding is something much more subjective. It's the perception that that number is too high. So density is kind of a mathematical formula that's emotion that's masquerading as a mathematical formula. So it's important to keep in mind crowding isn't density. And one way to think of this is you look at a place like South Central Los Angeles. If you measure this part of the city in persons per square mile, it's very high density. It's one of the densest neighborhoods in the country. But if you measure it in housing units per acre, it's a relatively low density. And so what this means is that there are too many people. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, gosh. I've been looking at the wrong, sorry. Thank you. This is a really good example of overcrowding. There are too many people and not enough housing. But it's not necessarily a housing density problem. And another great example of this is one of the speakers a couple of weeks ago talked about William H. White, who did a lot of analysis of public spaces in New York City, and they did a lot of observations of how people use them, and they surveyed people about which ones they liked best. And it turns out that the most heavily used park in the whole city was Paley Park. That people love this place, and it was rated very highly. But it was the most used, there were the most people in there, but everyone walked away saying, no, that wasn't crowded, that they perceived that it was not a crowded place, when in fact there were a lot of people there all the time. So it's all about perception. Sorry. So this contrast between how we perceive density and how it's measured, what it really is, this led to the book that Christoph mentioned, Visualizing Density. And it was an attempt to put some rationality into this highly charged debate over density by creating a visual catalog that shows what density looks like at different levels. And it showed how there can be good and bad densities at the same level. This is a neighborhood in Columbus, New Jersey, has the exact same density as this neighborhood in Vermont. And here's another one, 23 units in Washington, Capitol Hill. is the same as density as Staten Island, New York, but it looks very different. So, you know, we should be a lot more concerned about the way a project looks and how it works rather than the number of units it has per acre. So, you know, the question is what makes density feel like it's more than it actually is, or what might make it feel like it's less than it is. And that has everything to do with how we design it. So if you look at this little development that has 2 units of housing in the front and 2 units of housing in the back, pretty ugly. If this was proposed in your neighborhood, you say, no, that's too dense. We don't want 4 units of housing there. But what if it looked like this? Exact same site plan, 2 units in the front, 2 units in the back, but the way they design the building, the way they design the parking lot, the landscaping makes all the difference in the world. And so you might very well say, yeah, that would be fine. It looks like the houses that are farther down the street. We can live with that. So as part of visualizing density, we did workshops all over the country, and we showed people pictures of different types of environments at the same scale, and we asked them to rank them. What do they like? What do they not like? And then talk about what is it about this that you liked or didn't like. And we did this all over the country, and it was really interesting. Small towns, big cities, that people said the same things about the stuff that they liked and the stuff that they didn't like. It didn't matter whether we were in Phoenix, Arizona, or Idaho, or New York City. They all came up with the same set of phrases for bad density. Monotonous, cookie cutter, it's cut off from everything, it looks like it's got too many cars in it, and it looks transient, like nobody really cares about the place. And this is one image that was consistently rated at the bottom of the list. And, you know, this is an example of how people can get turned off to multifamily home and, you know, just looks kind of run down, like nobody cares about it, and you wouldn't want that in your town. On the other hand, it's really important to think about what were the attributes of good density. And this came up again and again, the top of the list, green. Pictures that had a lot of trees in them, people generally rated them much higher, which is, you know, another confirmation that you should never cut the trees out of the budget in a development project, because it is the one thing that will always make people fall in love with a place. Does it have some diversity? Is it connected? Is there a sense of identity and a sense of place? And will it look as good 20 years from now or 50 years as it does now? People get a sense of that when they look at architecture. They can see that there was some care put into it and some investment. And is it a place that's comfortable to walk? And this is an image that came up consistently at the top, this neighborhood in Vermont. It has all of those characters. So it's not the density number that determines the quality of a place. Sorry. I'm going to get this by the end of the talk, I promise. So it's not the number that really matters, but it's the form and whether it functions well. So, you know, we get distracted by the arguments that gets people the most upset. But it's not population density that matters, it's the spatial distribution of that density. So Dr. Kleinberg a couple weeks ago or last month showed this graphic, and I was really taken by it because it illustrates, he was illustrating a trend in Houston area, but it could be applied to most parts of the country. And it captures our challenge in a nutshell. It says that there's a steady shift towards a different type of home that people are wanting. And this is on one, you know, so we're shifting away from this, and this is something that Sugar Land has and the rest of the country has just a huge supply of. You know, it's the detached single-family home on a big yard where you have to drive everywhere you go. And there's a lot to recommend this. I mean, it's really nice to have all that privacy and lots of light, and you got a big yard and plenty of space. It's really great once you get there. But it takes up a lot of space, and at 2 to 4 units an acre, it eats up a lot of land. It pushes everyone apart, and it just takes it eliminates chances of building anything that's walkable. So back to this ideal, the smaller home, and you know, let's consider this thing that many people are saying they want, and more people every year are saying that they want it. You know, how do we get this? And I think that it's important to remember that this is all about locating people closer together and locating them close to the things, to the destinations that they have to go to, also known as density. There are lots of different types of housing that will achieve this, and I'm going to show you some of them. The first 5 of these are, you can add to a neighborhood or to a place, and you can still have a feeling that this is a single-family home neighborhood. So these are really useful housing types, because people really love single-family home neighborhoods, and you don't really have to give that character up just to get a little bit higher density. So one simple solution is just to build a home smaller and put them on smaller lots. And by doing so, you can raise the density by 2 or 3 times. And here's one in Atlanta, the same idea, but in a completely different aesthetic that fits really well in Tucson, Arizona, or another one in Austin, Texas. So the houses, when you put houses on narrow lots, then not only do you save space, but you create this sense of community because there's a rhythm to the front doors. And as you walk down the street, it's just much more interesting because you're looking at the way people design their houses, the way they furnish their porches, the way that they landscape their yards, and it's a very kind of engaging landscape. So another way to do it is to just add an accessory unit in the back of a lot. And this is done in a lot of places where real estate values are really high, and it's hard for people to find an affordable place to live. And the great thing about this is that you can have your mother-in-law or your father-in-law living back there, keep an eye on them, or you can have your millennial child living there, or you could use it as a way to pay off your mortgage. It just kind of broadens the possibilities, yet it still has the feel of a single-family home. And then when you get up to this level, 6 units an acre, then you get the benefit of some services. You can have a corner store. This is the threshold. You need about 6 units an acre across within a half a mile radius to be able to support this kind of business, because retailers don't want to be in a place where there are no customers. So it's an important thing to remember that duplexes, accessory units, small lot housing will get you these kind of benefits. Here's another housing type, the duplex. This is one in Oregon, looks like 2 houses close together, but it's actually a 2-family house. And this is starting to increase a little bit more affordability because you're sharing wall, and it's increasing energy efficiency because you don't have to cool you don't lose cold air out of 4 walls of the structure. Here's another one in Washington. They look very friendly. They look very attractive. And when you get up to about 7 units an acre, you can start having real bus service. Below that number, you have to heavily subsidize it. And it means that those are landowners and community members that are paying for that service. But if there are more people that can ride the bus, then it becomes much more affordable. Another type that's sort of come on the scene lately is what's called a big house, and we see these a lot in the Northeast where we traditionally have a lot of big houses. And instead of chopping up an old house, sort of arbitrarily, these are designed to be 4 units. And the great thing about them is they can have each unit on each corner has its own yard, has its own entrance. And that's what people really like about single-family homes is they want to have their front door, they want to have a yard, and this is a way to provide that. And here's another example in Rhode Island. So that's about 12 to 20 units an acre you can get, even though, when you put them together, it looks like a single-family home neighborhood. And then there's the townhouse or the row house, and it can be a traditional style, or it can have more of a modern look. And the nice thing about these loft style is that the problem with an attached house is that you don't have windows on 4 sides, but you can get a lot of natural daylight in by using really large windows on one side. You'd be surprised how sunny and light-filled these units can be. And at a density of 12 to 24 units an acre, then you make things like a supermarket or a drugstore possible. So you could walk to a place like this as opposed to always driving your car and fighting for a space in the parking lot. And then we're getting more dense with what's called stacked townhouses. And these are units where there's an entrance on the front, and then there's some sort of outdoor space on the upstairs. And you can see it a little bit better in these pictures in Vancouver, where you've got that access to the outdoors, a balcony, a deck, so that people that are living in a higher density still have the ability to have a garden or to sit outside and watch the sunset. And then up at this level, then you're really talking about some real convenient and pleasant modes of transportation, like light rail or streetcars, which people tend to really love. You know, wherever they have been built, they have been seized on. I've seen them in Salt Lake City, in Charlotte, in Portland. You know, people are really riding these things. They have a much more appeal than buses, even though I think buses are the workhorses that really make public transit systems work. You know, think about, you know, if you have several blocks of these low rises of 4 stories in your downtown, you'll get a critical mass of people that can walk to jobs, in stores. They can feed a light rail system that might connect with Houston. And these are the building blocks of walkable places. You know, you just want to have a lot of people within a small area that can ride an elevator down to the light rail stop or walk to the restaurant in the evening. They don't need a parking space every time they go somewhere. And if you design these carefully, then they will hold their value over time, and it will meet the needs of all these housing types I've talked about. If you put all those together in a community, you're going to have cradle-to-grave coverage in terms of meeting your housing needs of your population, and you'll become an attractive community for people of all stripes. So then there's the issue of parking. You know, it's really easy to manage parking when you have single-family homes, or even with small lot houses, or even duplexes. You can have, you know, driveways between the houses. But when you get up to a certain level, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And this is a good example of, you know, trying to make it work by fitting the parking at a higher density behind the units, so that the street has a really nice kind of feel to it, and they're tucked underneath the houses. So here's the problem. You know, when you have to provide a lot of housing for these apartment buildings, the choice is, you know, do you put it sort of in the center, and then you've got this kind of, instead of a green, you've got this great big parking lot that doesn't really sort of pull the place together. You could put it around the outside, but then you're kind of cutting yourself off from what's around it. It's probably a little better than having it in the center. Here's a better solution. You can put it right in the middle, so that people have easy access to their cars. And then you have kind of an uninterrupted street front. It's kind of nice to walk along that street. Problem with this is that people sort of tend to come and go, and they don't go out on the street as much. Here's another option, much more expensive, but really attractive, is to put it underground. And if you're, you know, in a market where the real estate values are really high and there's enough density, then that can be possible. So back to this charming slide, the cookie cutter land. This is an extreme example, but it illustrates the need for a good site plan, because, you know, those could be really, really wonderful houses individually, but the way they're put together just makes just an awful place to live. So it's really important that the same care that you give to the building needs to be applied to the neighborhood. You know, how are those buildings arranged? So, you know, it's the spatial arrangement of density that's going to make or break a place. And that's why it's crucial to focus on the whole neighborhood. You know, the blocks, the streets, as well as the house parcels. And I just wrote this book, How to Design Walkable Places. And I looked at existing neighborhoods all over the country. I wanted to find the best ones. I wanted to determine what are the qualities that make them walkable. And I looked at a lot of them, and I analyzed the form of 12 of them. And one of the things that became apparent was the best places had a highly connected street network with a lot of intersections. So the more chances you came to a corner and could make a choice between left or right, the more comfortable that place was to walk. Another characteristic was that they had really small blocks. That within these 12, they would range from less than 1 acre per block to 2.5 acres. So if you're subdividing land and you want to create a walkable neighborhood, you've got to get those block sizes really down to under 2.5 acres. And it might seem counterintuitive, but it's really important. Another thing is buildings have to be aligned along the street to form a continuous edge. Because it takes a lot more than a sidewalk to make a place walkable. If you take away the building, the edge and the windows and the bank and the stores from this scene, then you're left with a place that 5 people probably wouldn't be standing around chatting comfortably. It's not the sidewalk, it's all the other stuff around the sidewalk. And this is really hard to do. It's not easy. It's more than just doing a development project. It's about making a place. And it takes a lot of coordination in between private entities and developers and designers, but it is well worth the effort. And then, you can't say enough about the role of green space and public space. Adding a lot of trees, I was just stunned by how gorgeous the live oaks are on many streets, the way they kind of line the streets and create this beautiful canopy. I know they grow slowly, but it's a long-term investment that's worth making. So if you line your streets with trees, and then you create greens, the houses face onto the green, and then that open space is a connective tissue in the community, that it leads from one place to the next. You can almost get through the neighborhood going entirely on green spaces. Here's a good example in Arlington, where they built this green, a lot of new houses around the green, and then extending from that green, they had little sort of courtyards. So the green fingers kind of extended into the neighborhood. So there was like this semi-public place before you got up on the porches and the stairways of the houses. So it's like a sequence of private to semi-public to public spaces, and all green and all connected. So, you can create convenience by locating homes and services and jobs close together, and it's all about arranging things and creating proximity. And it's really a nice thing to think about. Instead of density, think of proximity, because that is really all about co-location, and it's about convenience, and it's about choices. And a good example of this is Lake Oswego, Oregon, which is a town that's outside of Portland. It's a little bit similar in terms of its satellite relationship that you have with Houston. And they just did a great job. They had this like strip highway as their main street, and they just decided to, you probably want to see what that looks like. They just decided to redo it at much more intensively, and they landscaped it, and it's become this commercial center for the town. I don't know whether these are offices or apartments upstairs, but lots of great shops and restaurants right in the middle of this town center, set on top of a parking garage. And it's in the middle of town. And you can see it's those large buildings in the lower right. And within a quarter-mile or half-mile radius of this, they just intensive infill development, and they just decided to add a lot of residences. And they built apartments above shops on Main Street. And then a little farther beyond that, they just made some multifamily housing. And then a little bit farther beyond that, lots of townhouses. So shops, apartments above shops, apartment buildings, and then a little farther out, townhouses, and then beyond that, single-family homes. And it just made this really nice sequence of different types of housing, closer to town, farther away from town, but they're all within walking distance, so lots of housing options. And it just feeds lots of people into this commercial center without having to drive their cars. And it gives people a chance to walk to work, walk to go shopping. They can get some exercise, they can meet their neighbors, and they don't need a parking space. And you can add commercial, it's important to just mix it up. This is a development in Atlanta. Lots of housing. In the center of this housing development, they built a commercial core with shops and then offices upstairs. If you want to have a little office, don't want to have a home office, you want to have an office, but within walking distance, there's a spot for that, and there's a spot to get together with friends. And then here's another example. This is a supermarket that's located in a neighborhood of San Francisco that didn't have any services like this. And it's a good sign that supermarket chains are getting better at scaling down their stores to work at a neighborhood level. And a lot of, this is a big issue right now. How do we get the corner store to come back into neighborhoods, or how do we insert them into new neighborhoods? And Austin has done some good work on this, just setting regulations to say, okay, we want to have corner stores, but they have to fit into the character of the neighborhood. They've got to be screened, they have to have the parking on the side instead of the front, and they have to really, not make a nuisance of themselves, be an asset. So you can add both retail and residential at the same time with this commercial block building, which you see all over the country from the 19th century, and they're starting to come back again. And these are some smaller scale versions popping up. Just small little buildings with retail on the ground floor and other activities upstairs. So here's a place that does all this stuff at the same time. This is in Denver. This was where the Gray Squares was an old defunct amusement park. So it was several urban blocks that was just kind of sitting there, and the developer did some great things. First thing they did was they put in a street system that connected with the surrounding streets, and then within that they built alleys. So they broke down those blocks to even smaller size to increase the number of intersections and to lower the size of the blocks. And then they built a green network that threads through the neighborhood. And then they added housing, small lot housing, a few duplexes, so single family home type feeling, but much higher density, very walkable. And then they added commercial on the other part of the block, including a supermarket with lots of fresh produce, just the kind of thing that most people want to live near. And then they kept the old carousel building, and they made it into a community theater, so it has a civic component to it. And so those businesses not only serve this new neighborhood, but all the residents in the neighborhoods around it. So it's a really good example of infilling, tying into what was already there, but creating something completely new, and adding to the diversity, housing diversity in the whole district. And here's an aerial photograph of it. So I talk about proximity, but I think the word propinquity is even better. I just discovered this word. I didn't know it my whole life. And it's great because it's about closeness in space, but it's also closeness in relationship. That living closer together can help you bring yourself closer to your community. Because, in the end, the urban experience that we have depends on, and the communities that we build and the institutions that we create. And having been here a day, I feel like Sugar Land is really strong in the sense that there's real strong civic pride, and there are really strong institutions that make people feel attached to this place. So I urge you, as you plan your town, to create places where people can get out of their cars and walk and meet each other on the sidewalk or in public gathering places, and to focus on what people want. And I think what everybody wants is health and companionship and convenience and beauty. And if you strive to get those things, and you strive to include those for every member of your community, then I think you're going to end up with a cleaner environment, and you're going to end up with a more livable neighborhood, and you're going to end up with housing and mobility for people of all income levels and all ages. But I think in the process you'll create places that bring people closer together and in the end make them happy. Thank you very much. I do want to say that if you are interested in finding more about visualizing density, there's a website, interactive website on the Lincoln Institute website that you can get to through that lincolninstitute.edu. It has lots of more information on density, including some interactive games. If you're dealing with this issue and you want to try to educate other people or educate yourself, it's a really great resource. We also just released the ebook version of Made for Walking. You could check that out as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Steve Spillette and Keith Simon to go ahead and come up, and we're going to do our next panel here. So just as an introduction, what we have up here is a professional consultant and a professional developer. Keith Simon is Executive Vice President for CDC Houston, which is a subsidiary of Coventry Development out of New York. You may have heard about Springwoods. This is a huge new development up at the Grand Parkway in I-45 near the Woodlands, actually next to the new Exxon campus. This is the man behind that. And it's actually a really interesting development because it is not, unlike a lot of planned communities in Houston, purely single family. It actually has a huge mix of both different housing types and different uses, including retail and office mixed in with the housing. So he's going to talk a little bit about that project. And then meanwhile, Steve Spillette here is really one of the experts on the Houston housing market. He knows what builders are building, he knows what the market is demanding, and he knows the economics of all of that. He's been at this for over 20 years, working in the Houston area and watching the Houston housing market change over time. So we'll have each of them make an introductory presentation and then have a roundtable discussion here.
Thank you, Christoph. My presentation is very brief, and I just wanted to focus on a few things I was able to pull together that kind of show. I mean, you've heard from Julie and from Christoph, and past speakers in these forums, what's going to be happening, and I kind of want to show you some evidence of what's kind of already been happening in Fort Bend County that leads us to some conclusions about the direction of the potential direction of the housing market in the near term. Which ones?
I don't know.
Oh, okay, great. First of all, these are statistics that I have pulled from the census, comparing 2000 to 2012, so a 12-year period basically. And of course, this is for Fort Bend County, by the way, not just Sugar Land, but you don't exist in isolation. This shows, of course, the magnitude of the growth that you've been experiencing, no surprise to anyone. But did you realize that the rate of growth of one-person and two-person in households in Fort Bend County is basically the same as the rate of growth of households with 3 people or more? And, it's pretty common knowledge that one person, I mean, yes, I'm sure there's a number of, single-person households that are quite happy to buy a 3,500 square foot single-family house with a big yard. Maybe that's, and they're perfectly happy with that. But I can guarantee you that there's a large chunk of that market that doesn't want that doesn't fit their life stage or their lifestyle. Fort Bend County is already adding a number of these people. 2-person households also, a number of them fit into that category. This shows, if you take a household, there's one person who is designated by the census as the householder, and they record the age of that person. This shows you the change in households during that same 12-year period by the age of the householder. So as you've added households, there's so many that were headed by folks under 35, folks in the 35 to 64 age range, and folks who are over 65. You have really focused, Fort Bend County generally has really honed in on that age 35 to 64 age range. I mean, you could say Fort Bend has specialized in adding households headed by people in that age range. Not that you haven't added some in the other categories, but I mean, it's obviously a huge disparity, and primarily family households, meaning that there are at least 2 people who are closely related, living within the same household. So you compare that to what's been happening by the way, this is a pie chart that just shows what share of the households you've been adding. I highlighted the under 35 households, that they've only constituted 12.4%. And the households of seniors over age 65 have just been a little under 20%, but only 12.4% of your households have been headed, and during that 12, in terms of the growth in households, been headed by folks under 35, and over 2/3 of the households have been headed by folks in that middle age range. But you look at what's been happening in the change in payroll employment in Fort Bend County. Over 1/4 of the jobs that have been added are being held by folks who are under age 35. Actually, that's just that blue pie shape is age 22 to 34. So basically, folks that are getting out of college up to age 34. I mean, and you look back at that other percentage of folks, the households that sort of correspond to that, which is 12.4%. Then you realize, wow, we're adding all these jobs, many of which are quite well paying, even for that younger age range, but they're not living here. We're missing out on a very large market. And as your job growth continues, there's no reason to think that this is going to change. There's a reason that a lot of the employers are focused on how do we appeal to that younger age range right now, because that's who we need to hire. So the recent history already shows that you're sort of missing out on a significant potential component of the housing market. And so what do these very few census statistics tell you? These looking backward recent history statistics tell you about what's happening right now, what's going to be happening in the near future. And they point to demand for housing diversity. Because people who are age 25 or age 30, maybe those 1 or 2 person households without kids, they often want and need a completely different housing type than what has dominated your housing stock here in Sugar Land. They are not ready, or they can't afford, or just don't want the very large single-family home on the large lot. And furthermore, also, don't forget the growth is also happening in that older age range above 65. They're not necessarily wanting to, they may want to stay in the same location because they have other family or they have neighbors and friends that they want to stay around. But they are not ready to maintain a large house. They don't want to clean it anymore, just because, hey, the grandkids come to visit a couple times a year, but the rest of the year, I've got 2,000 square feet in my house that are not being used. Plus, I've got stairways and things like that are harder and harder on me personally. So they need other types of housing. So really to accommodate the nature of the people who already live here and who are aging, and the people who are being hired at your local employers, there should be a lot of support for a strong diversity of housing, ranging from stacked multifamily to townhomes, single family attached. It's a single family housing type. They just share a wall. Continue, of course, more of the large lot, large square footage single family, small single family on a single story. I mean, how many times have I heard in my market research that, oh my gosh, I want to keep having a single family home, but I don't want a big lot. I want a small lot, and I want it to be one story, basically the patio home model, and how rare that has been to provide in so many of the places that we've worked in. And so that's a significant housing type that the city should be looking at, and also what is now called the generic term is seniors housing, and that ranges from everything from independent living all the way through more intensively assisted types of lifestyles to allow people to stay in the community once they've aged out of their existing home. So I think that this is really happening, not just the projections that have been shown to you and told to you in the past, but the evidence is already there that these trends have already been occurring. And that's an important message that I want to make sure that you are aware of.
And that brings us to Keith.
Great. Thanks very much, Christoph. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm here to talk a little bit about the business case for residential choice, which is crystallized by this chart, which is from the book Reshaping Metropolitan America. Some of this is what Steve was just talking about. If you look at the top part of this chart and you look at the bottom two lines, I think is interesting. You see that the households without children are projected to grow 28% from 2010 to 2030. And then the single-person households are projected to grow by 44% in that same time period. In the bottom, what you're basically seeing is that there's a huge shift in that big slug of home ownership into what this book calls the downsizing category, which is where the householder is age 65 plus. So what does this really mean for residential? I'm suggesting that the existing typical Sugar Land residential will always have demand, but a balance of these kind of new residential formats that you've heard a little bit about from Julie that respond to these changing household demographics will really make Sugar Land more sustainable, and it's going to make Sugar Land more attractive to business relocations, jobs, right? And we all know that job growth is a very important aspect to fuel residential growth, retail growth, and so forth, and really make this community sustainable over the long haul. And by adding these new residential formats to balance with the existing that you already have, I'm going to propose that those traditional Sugar Land homes may actually become more valuable, since you're not going to flood this residential market with more of the same. So what are these new residential formats? Well, it's all the things that you heard about from Julie. The smaller single-family detached homes with main floor masters. It's townhomes, it's condos in a variety of different kinds of formats, and it's multifamily rental apartments. It means somewhat inherently higher densities, but it means a more vital environment, and it offers choice. And also, don't forget about senior apartments, independent senior apartments, assisted living, and so forth. So this may be a little controversial, but I'm going to suggest that multifamily will not and does not degrade single-family property values. It is a very strong and growing product type by choice. What do I mean by that, by choice? I mean, a lot of people are now choosing to rent, maybe because of their life stage. Maybe they don't want to be a homeowner and have a mortgage and pay insurance and all those types of things. Also here in Houston, we've got a lot of people obviously in the oil and gas industry. They're highly mobile, they're in, they're out. For them, owning a home is not the right thing. They're also international. They may come from other countries. They're very used to living in rental apartments. Remember that the incomes required to rent today's luxury apartment is basically in the $70,000 per year and up kind of a category. So these are not inexpensive kinds of units. I think the key is, where is it located and what does it look like? So that ties back to the where's the right place to locate this type of housing? Well, I think it's probably where there are activity centers or close to employment centers, close to retail and so forth, so that it can help the retail do better on the nights and the weekends when maybe the employment folks aren't around. In terms of what does it look like, that gets to the aspect of design standards. Good quality materials, good quality architecture, and so forth. Remember that today's luxury apartment is a very competitive marketplace, and the developers that are building these projects are always trying to one-up the last best thing. So what we're seeing in our developments from apartment developers are 10-foot ceilings, granite countertops, in-unit laundry rooms, and so forth. And so these are really investment grade kinds of projects that really stand the test of time, we think. Okay, so let's look at some examples. What I've got for you are some examples from Denver and also from here in the Houston area. So first, from Denver, I'm going to show you some pictures from the Stapleton planned new community. It was the site of the former Denver airport, 4,100 acres, now in their 12th year of build-out. The master plan calls for about 12,000 homes. 30% of those are multifamily rental units. The net density in the community is 11 dwelling units per acre. It's 100% Energy Star 3.0, so highly sustainable, energy efficient homes across the board, 1,100 acres of open space and parks, and 10 million square feet of commercial, so a balance of jobs and housing again. Here's a picture looking to the west. It's midway between the new Denver airport and downtown. And again, the densities that you're seeing in the foreground are the Stapleton community. They're a little higher than the traditional suburban master plan community. Here's a screenshot from one of their website pages where they're talking about the multifamily in the community. There are several different kinds of projects that are shown here. And again, multifamily is about 30% of their residential offering. In this particular location, they've gathered together several multifamily projects around a public space to help make it activated and make it vital. Here's another multifamily project in Stapleton showing good design character and nice architectural detailing. And here's another one. And then lastly, in Stapleton, open space is a real big part of the community. So they've got both natural spaces as well as manicured parks to provide the relief to the density and to provide that kind of public space instead of having everyone have their own large private yard. Also in the Denver area is a project of ours, which is called Ridgegate. It is a master planned community, a mixed-use master planned community south of Metro Denver along I-25. It's 3,500 acres. It was land that's been held out of development for about 35 years, now in its 10th year of build-out. And it started 10 years ago with an engine, a jobs engine, a medical center. Its master plan calls for about 12,000 homes, 40% of which would be multifamily, 1,200 acres of open space and parks, and 20 million square feet of commercial. So again, this jobs and housing balance. So the idea is that it's a transformational type of community in the suburbs, something a little bit different. The map here shows the boundary of the city that it's in. It's in the city of Lone Tree, a small city, a young city. And you get a sense from this that Ridgegate, which is the colored portion, represents about half of the total city. The rest of the city is pretty much built out. Current population's around 12,000. By annexing it into the city, we were able to help the city grow, which they wanted to do, and to offer more choice in the city and have that kind of jobs balance. So I-25 runs down the middle of this picture, and you see the community plan here, which is a mixed-use kind of a community. A little bit more of a close-up here of what we're doing right now at Ridgegate. Again, I-25 runs down the middle. The community has two interchanges on I-25, so again, a very strong transportation kind of foundation. And you begin to see at this level that there's a real network of streets, allowing lots of choice for ways in and out. All of those streets have detached sidewalks and tree lawns so that the streets become quite walkable. There's an interlacing of an open space system through the community that allows everyone to very quickly get to a park system and on a trail in a park make their way to the bottom of this image, which are some very high land that is sort of the natural destination to get to a higher elevation. Wherever these trails cross a busy street, there's a built-in pedestrian undercrossing from day one. So really lots of different tools and tricks to promote mobility, not only for people in cars, but for people on foot. And here you have the opportunity to live close to where you might work, walk to work, bike to work, and so forth. What are shown in the black boxes are the locations of the first 4 multifamily projects and how they're interspersed amongst the community. And in the red line, you're seeing a light rail line coming into the community with 3 stations where the red dots are. This is a picture of what that western village looks like. So this is about a square mile that you're looking at right now after 10 years of development. So again, you kind of see that pattern of a street network, somewhat of a modified grid, lots of choices of ways in and out to distribute traffic instead of concentrate it. Relatively small block sizes, small neighborhoods. The neighborhood sizes range from the largest of maybe 100 units and the smallest to maybe 30 units. So they're much smaller types of modules of residential, lots of different types of residential ranging from triplex homes to townhomes, the 4 multifamily projects, and then more traditional single-family detached. In the lower left of the slide, you see the buildings under construction. That's a new campus for the Charles Schwab Corporation. And just above them, the larger buildings are that hospital that kicked off the Ridgegate community. And then just zooming in on some of the residential in the community, this is probably a little unfair, but in the lower left is the original homestead that was on the property, which we've restored and is now a historic amenity for the community. But at that point in time, the density was 1 dwelling unit per 3,500 acres. Now what you're seeing in the pictures in the up at the top and on the right are one of the new multifamily projects. Again, an investment grade type of project. It's 4 stories wrapped around a parking garage with a very nice street frontage and good quality materials. In the lower right, in the background, you see the Charles Schwab campus under construction. So if somebody might work there, they could certainly live in this apartment project and walk across the street to work. And then some of the other residential components in the community. In the upper left, a row townhome project that comes out to about 20 dwelling units per acre. On the right-hand side, a small lot, single-family detached home neighborhood of about 30 units that comes out to about 5 or 6 dwelling units per acre. And then in the lower left, in the distance, a more traditional neighborhood at about 3 dwelling units per acre. And then lastly, Springwoods Village. So you may know Springwoods Village up in the northwest part of Metro Houston along I-45, just south of the Woodlands. It's about 1,800 acres. That land has been held out of development for 50 years. And we started it in 2010 with the ExxonMobil campus as the engine to drive us with jobs and so forth. And we've been able to add the Southwestern Energy headquarters to the community as well, and that's under construction. The new State Highway 99 also helps a lot to drive the community with the mobility link to the east and west. The master plan calls for about 5,000 residential units, 40% of which will be multifamily. The requirements for the home builders are that they must have LEED compliance. They have a choice to go with another standard, which is the United States Green Building Council plus Energy Star 3.0. So very high sustainability requirements. And this is an effort to really build homes for the future. It includes 350 acres of open space and parks and about 10 million square feet of commercial. So again, this jobs and housing balance. This is a rendition of the master plan. In the center of the community, you might see the label there for Town Center, which is the most intense and mixed-use part of the community, a mix of residential, hotels, office, retail, and so forth. And then arrayed around it, an employment district on pretty much all sides. But then as you move to the left of the slides, you see that the densities start to relax a little bit and get into more traditional mid and lower scale densities. You see a network of open space that's woven through the community there with those linear park systems which serve to connect people with nature. In this case, nature is the Spring Creek Greenway, which is at the upper left of the slide. So no matter where you live or work here, you can, in a few steps, get to one of these park corridors and make your way to the north to the Spring Creek Greenway. And when you cross a busy street, or one of those park corridors crosses a busy street, it's via a underground pedestrian tunnel, so you don't ever have to cross a busy street. And then this is just a plan view of the same thing you just looked at. So again, on the right-hand side is I-45. The big roadway that you see down near the bottom is the Grand Parkway, running along the southern edge and then sweeping up into the I-45 and continuing to the east over to Kingwood. So important connections, a grid of streets that connect to those major regional connections, an open space system interwoven between it. The ExxonMobil campus is at the top there. The Southwestern Energy campus is along the right-hand side, along I-45. And there will be a number of other employment campuses like those arrayed around the town center, which is in kind of the middle of the slide, if you will. This is what it's starting to look like. Still a lot of active construction going on there, of course. In the upper left, you see the ExxonMobil campus. You kind of see the, thank you, you see the angled road coming in there near the top. That's the Hardy Toll Road coming up to I-45. And in the foreground, you see these three development areas, which I wanted to talk about for a minute. These are the first three residential portions of the Springwoods Village community. So at the right, oops, I'm sorry. That's sensitive. At the right, you see the multifamily project, which is a 4-story luxury rental project at the right of the slide there, the higher density, that's at about 60 dwelling units per acre. And then just to the left of that, you see a small neighborhood. It's about 80 homes. That'll be a combination of townhomes and small single-family detached homes. And then to the left at the bottom, you see a larger neighborhood. It's about 50 homes. More traditional density of around 3 dwelling units per acre. And so in this way, the first phase of residential in the Springwoods community is about 500 residential units spread across 4 different product types. This is what the multifamily project looks like. So again, it's a 4-story building wrapped around a garage, investment grade kind of a project. Rents ranging from $1,000 a month all the way up to $2,500 per month, and this comes out to about 60 dwelling units per acre. And then lastly in Springwoods Village is there are some images here of the town center. So this is the heart and soul of the community with the greatest mixed use arrayed around a public plaza. To the left in this picture is a hotel, the plaza, and then to the right of the plaza, retail facing the plaza. And then moving down the street to the top of the slide, down the middle, is a main street, which would have retail at the street level, and then office uses above the retail. So trying to create a vital environment there with a lot of street activity, and really the heart of the community, as we said. Lastly, this is a picture of another residential project that would be integrated into that town center. In this case, it's a 6-story with ground level retail along the active street frontage and wrapped around a parking garage. Similar model, that kind of investment grade multifamily project located in the right place. That's it.
Well, meanwhile, anybody who has questions, get them on your cards and pass them up. But I want to start with, we just saw some very attractive multifamily development. But one of the questions I've heard a lot here in Sugar Land is, there are complexes in Houston that were very attractive multifamily development 20 years ago, and that are now deteriorated, cheaper rents, and generally declining neighborhoods. What makes you think that Springwoods is going to keep its value over the long term? And to Steve, what do you see that makes some areas keep their value over the long term and others decline?
Well, it's a good question, and I think that there are a couple of aspects in answering that. One would be that building apartments today is vastly different than building apartments 20 years ago, right? Today, they're very highly traded investment grade kind of properties. And that has certainly raised the bar on the quality of the construction. I think it makes them more sustainable, and it helps them hold their value over a much longer period of time than perhaps was done 20 years ago. The second aspect would be what I said, the importance of high quality design standards and requirements. So at Springwoods, we have, obviously there's no zoning where we are, so we are essentially zoning and enforcing our own, community with a master plan, a land use plan, a zoning plan, if you will, and a set of development standards. So if you buy land at Springwoods, you have to go through our own design review committee. You have to prove up that you have good architectural design, you're using good quality materials in a good quality way and in a highly sustainable way. You have to achieve a LEED Gold certification. So there are all these kinds of levels built in to ensure long-term quality.
And do you think the proximity to retail and the proximity to open space and the proximity to employment will help that as well?
I do. I think as long as the employment's still there, and with the investment that's being made by companies like Exxon and Southwestern, it's going to be there for an awfully long time. And if they ever leave, someone else will come in there. So you're right. The connection with employment as well as those amenities, such as retail and open space and parks, is an important aspect to that long-term sustainability and value holding.
And before I let Steve answer that, I'm going to ask Julie to come on up so she can chime in as well.
Yeah, well, to echo some of what Keith was saying, the first thing that you need to do to have any kind of housing hold its value is have a good regional economy. And I think, part of what happened in Houston that had such dramatic impacts that still reverberate, around the in people's thoughts today was, of course, our economy collapsed right after we had a huge period of building incredible numbers of very low quality multifamily units, many of which really didn't have much thought into design. They were done for tax shelter purposes. So the tax laws changed and our economy crashed. That led to some pretty nasty results. That's very true. But I would also say that when there's really what's going to make any kind of housing hold its value, but especially say denser housing and multifamily, is when you make the location within a well-designed, not just the well-designed property, housing property itself, but also locating it within a well-designed public environment and where you're making proximity, or your term, propinquity, a part of the privilege of living there. That is going to be, equally as important as making any kind of multifamily housing or any housing hold its value, because it becomes inculcated into the rents and the demand for that kind of space. The worst thing you can do is, I've heard this from many communities, apartments, if we're going to have them, we want to locate them over in the industrial area. And because they shouldn't be near anything else.
That's one way to get them to lose value.
I was going to say, you are guaranteeing you're going to end up with really bad results in not very distant future. It's when you put that kind of housing, make sure it has high design standards, putting it within proximity, of course, to your own local job base. So that's the other factor, not just regional jobs, but the local sugarland job base, as long as that continues to be strong, and locating it within proximity to those retail, the retail and services, to the open space, and other activities that speak to the way people want to spend their free time. That's how you're going to get it to hold value. And that was not the philosophy that governed multifamily development in Houston during the middle part of the 20th century, and that's part of why you've seen some of the results that you've seen.
And I think, just to add on, remember that one of these projects costs on the order of $60 million to build today. These high quality, maybe 4-story, garage wrapped luxury apartments. It's a big investment. There's a lot at stake there for the initial developer, their financier, and eventually, yes, they sell it to someone else and it becomes an investment property for them. And they may sell it again, but they want to keep it up, because of what's been invested in it, the cost to buy these things. The stakes are very high to keep them maintained and keep them vital and successful.
Okay. A question that multiple people have asked here, which is, number one, what's wrong with saying Sugar Land will target people who are in the 35-plus demographic? And what's wrong with saying let other cities provide other housing options and let Sugar Land specialize in large lot single family?
Well, one problem with that is that this is not a full life cycle community. That it seems like this kind of place that cares about the people that live here, and if you're not willing to provide housing at the beginning of life and the end of life, then it seems like you're falling short in your role as a community. If your kids can't afford to live here, if your aging parents don't have a place to move to, then that's a bit of a problem. That's just from the sociological point of view. You guys could probably answer better the market aspect of that.
Well, if you're able to, these young folks who are being hired at your local employers, there's going to be some share of them that just, no, I've got to live inside the loop in Houston, but then that's certainly not all of them. And the more of those folks, who are supporting your local economy, underpinning your local economy, that you can capture early in their life, the more likely they are going to be to want to remain in Sugar Land when it is time for them to buy that single-family house with the big yard. If they are living elsewhere and decide, no, I love, city center more or inside the loop or whatever, that's part of what's been happening now is that folks who have been deciding that, this environment's pretty great, and I'm not ready to leave my apartment, but hey, I'm actually, instead of just, moving straight out to Sugar Land or wherever, they're revitalizing single-family neighborhoods in the city of Houston. And spending a lot of money to do it. These are very affluent people. If you can capture those kind of folks in that earlier stage, you're more likely to retain them once they move into that single-family buying period.
Well, and my answer to that, I guess, would be think about what I showed you, particularly with the Ridgegate Master Plan community in Colorado and Springwoods here in the Houston area. Both of them now have major corporations who have deliberately chosen to embed brand new campuses into a master plan community. Why did they do that? They used to only put those things out on some new greenfield site somewhere else, right? Because they've kind of woken up and realized that in order to be competitive over the next several decades, they've got to attract the talent that's just coming out of college now. And they need to do that in a way that puts their new campus someplace where there's a choice, at least a choice. Not everybody's going to do it, to live close to work, close enough to work that you don't need your car on a daily basis. That was very important to Schwab in selecting the Ridgegate community, and it was also very important to Exxon in selecting the Springwoods community, that they knew that we would be developing this range of residential, including, very importantly, these higher density forms of residential that appeal to the younger generations, be it rental or smaller formats for starter homes, townhomes, things like that.
I love that the gasoline company wants to provide places where people don't have to use
It's
their car
a
every day.
competitive workforce environment.
This is great.
And so I think, if Sugar Land chooses not to do that, I think then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage to attract companies to relocate to Sugar Land or maybe even retain them in Sugar Land.
So for a suburban community like Sugar Land that is also trying to build an employment base and trying to retain a retail base, what's an appropriate percentage of these different housing types? And is there a percentage of multifamily that's too high? Is it possible to oversaturate the market with multifamily and end up having those projects not lease up?
There's definitely too much. There's no question about that. I don't know if there's a magic number, though. It really kind of depends upon the design of the community and, if how many good places for multifamily there are and what that might yield. So I don't think you should just set a magic number that 30% is the right number, say, or 20% or whatever. You can't pick a number, but I think there is too much. I agree with that as well.
I think, again, it's hard to pick just an exact number. I do think it's closely related to the local job base here in Sugar Land or you're nearby, in Missouri City, Stafford, the general area, Fort Bend County, this part of Fort Bend County. It should be closely related to that job base. If you exceed, if a multifamily stock exceeds the job growth significantly, then yeah, you're at risk of overbuilding. But that's what it should really be tied to.
But it seems and I agree, and from a planning perspective, it makes a lot of sense to identify those parts of town that are appropriate for higher density and multifamily development, and then phase it over time. Lay out a coherent neighborhood or downtown, or and then just identify parcels that get developed over time, so you can kind of modulate it as you go along. If it seems like you need more, then you build more. If you feel like you've maxed out, then you tone it back.
And I think, the market, again, these are very competitive projects, and these developers are very savvy. They do market studies. They know what their competitors are doing in terms of lease rates and rental rates, right? And if it's stopping, any kind of a growth curve, they're not going to build a new one. They're not going to be able to get financing to build a new one. So it's somewhat, market regulated because of the jobs, and the jobs are the big driver. But I think, as you said, finding the right place is also an aspect. As I understand it, there's some multifamily here in the town center, but only maybe 150 units or so. Probably could have been more. I don't know if there are opportunities for more nearby.
Yeah, it seems like a wasted opportunity with all of the commercial activity in this town center to not give people the convenience of living near it. Just having upper floor apartments would be great.
There is a condo project here. I think started off as rental, but it converted to condo. Though some of them are still rented out, but they get by far higher rents than any other rental housing in the city of Sugar Land, because you're able to wrap in the benefits of the proximity.
Yeah, it seems like a real wasted opportunity.
Julie, you showed this huge range of housing types. And one of the interesting things is that some of them seem very familiar from a Houston region perspective, and some of them didn't. We see a lot of multifamily residential, the sort of 5-story apartment model. We see a lot of large lot suburban development, and we've seen actually a huge quantity of townhouse development. But I can't think of as many examples of the sort of smaller lot suburban development, walkable, small lot, single family neighborhoods. So I'm curious for all of you, what are the economic challenges of these different market types? Are there some that are easier to develop than others? And if there's a market for these sort of walkable, small lot neighborhoods, why aren't we seeing more of them?
I think in the city of Houston itself, you're seeing the revitalization of some of those small lot, single family neighborhoods. So it's not like the market has shunned them. That's happening right now. I think that it just hasn't made its way out yet. I will say that there are a number of, there have been some, in fact, my neighborhood has some right now of the sort of the patio home variety, where it's small lot, and these houses are very desirable and hold their value because they're in a great part of town. They were well built and in a well-maintained public environment. So I think that there's still lessons to be learned where we've seen narrower frontage lots, subdivisions that have gone in. Design has not been the high priority. That's been the missing ingredient. And I think that there's a need for leadership, and I think that Keith's firm is helping to demonstrate that. on how you can do those narrower lots and still create a great environment instead of some of the sort of small lot suburban tract housing that has been built in the Houston region, which has not provided a good example. I mean, I will say that, one thing that the examples that Julie was showing, one thing that was missing in a very good way was it didn't look just like a garage and a driveway, which is a big, something that a lot of you have seen, and then when you have outlying narrow lot subdivisions in Houston, it looks like it's just a bunch of garages and driveways, and using those design techniques to put the garage on the side or behind, what have you, makes all the difference in the world in creating an environment that's going to be much more appealing to a wider range of people.
I think you're going to be seeing it coming. The Woodlands has already been doing some small lot residential, and that's been pretty successful. If you remember the three that I showed you at Springwoods Village, the center area, the center neighborhood was that product, a very small lot, single-family detached with alleys, garages in the back, porches on the front. And, all I can tell you right now is that builder has 25 of the 80 homes already under contract, and the model's not even open yet. So
I'm going to guess the garages were not in front.
No, the garages are in the back.
Right.
Yeah, on the alley.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good sign. And the way this works is you got to find somebody to pioneer the idea and be successful at it. Once they're successful, everybody else starts jumping on the bandwagon. So we're hoping that we can, establish a new model at Springwoods Village for this type of product in the suburbs. It's been very appealing in the Ridgegate project to the empty nester crowd who kids are gone, don't want a big yard anymore, I'm traveling more, but I do still want a single-family detached home. How do I get that, but still be able to stay in the suburbs where I, have friends and I know everything? It takes a new product to meet your life stage.
He mentioned the Woodlands, and that's actually a great example, the East Shore, I'm assuming you're talking about. I mean, they get fantastic prices for those homes. I mean, I can't believe it. Yeah, it's just incredible. And again, they're well-designed homes, and it's a well-designed neighborhood with very appealing public environment, and again, the proximity to both their town center and to the Lake Woodlands and the waterway. So when you capitalize on all those kind of things, you're ending up with the lots are quite small, but they are detached homes and extremely high value, and there's no reason to think that they wouldn't continue to hold their value for a very long time.
Yeah, they have this type has taken off in other parts of the country, including Colorado and Oregon and Maryland and much of New England. And, the key is to not put the garage in front, to make it what's called a snout house, where all you see is garage door. That's very unattractive. It doesn't have the appeal of the places that you're talking about or the ones that I showed. So if you put the cars in the back or on the side, then you've got something that people just, I think, innately take a shine to, because there's something very appealing about a small house that people can really warm up to. So it's the sort of thing that people might resist it in the beginning because they don't know if there's a market for it, but once they see that there is, then they catch on like wildfire.
Keith, incidentally, I know you've got a flight to catch.
I apologize. I do need to leave pretty soon.
Okay.
I could have you answer one more question.
I've got a big pile of questions. So one question that came up multiple times is actually impact on infrastructure. As you're going to higher densities, what kind of impact does that have on traffic? What kind of impact does that have on schools? What kind of impact does that have on public space and utilities? What do you need to do to make sure that increased density doesn't overwhelm the systems and leave the existing residents stuck in traffic or their kids in overcrowded schools?
Regarding schools, I actually did some research on this topic for the city of Sugar Land a year or two ago. Well, it was technically for a developer, but it was submitted to the city of Sugar Land. And, one thing that found was that in Class A apartments, the kind that Keith was talking about, the number of kids actually is quite low because you have to be making a fair amount of money to live there. And most of the folks that can live and pay that kind of rent, pretty much have their life planned out so that they're living there for a certain period of time, and then they have the money to go buy a single-family home when they know it's time to start a family, or for their kid to be, of school age. So they actually had a very low share of children living in those kinds of apartments. And just regarding traffic, a multifamily project, may have a marginally higher traffic generation amount than single family. If you compare it to commercial uses like office or retail, it's not even in the same league. What generates traffic in any one given location are your commercial uses, not your residential uses. I mean, the residential uses collectively over a very large area, sure, they're going to end up loading the freeways, and you don't need multifamily to do that. I think we all can see that from Houston, from the example we have, in the Houston region. But in any one spot, a single use, or even 2 or 3 multifamily projects are not going to be a major traffic burden, compared to like a Walmart or an office building. Those are it's completely a different level.
I think if the density is located and integrated into a community plan in the right places, close to where the jobs are, close to where the shopping, and retail is, maybe there's less traffic because people are not using their car. They can walk to work or bike to work,
Exactly.
and they're not using their car to just go to that short little trip. So I think that's part of it, Christoph. And I think, as Steve said, it's not the residential that really drives it. It's the employment and the big retail, sort of the big box retail that drives that kind of traffic, I think. In terms of the other infrastructure, the open space and so forth, again, it's part of the whole integrated community plan that if you're going to have density, you got to have, open space right next to it or near it so that there's that release point for people to get out into nature, because if they're living in a small space, they're going to need to get out into nature a little bit. But a lot more efficient to do that as a group piece of nature than a nature in a big backyard that maybe you walk out there, once a week.
Well, I've got a couple more questions for Julie and Steve, but
You're going to release
everybody
me?
give Keith a round of applause.
I apologize. I have to catch a flight.
Julie, you've talked a lot about design, and Steve, you work for developers, so you know where they're coming from. What can a city do to encourage good design in these developments? What can a city do to prevent simply having those cookie cutter houses you showed, or the cookie cutter multifamily, or the cookie cutter townhouses?
Well, one thing you can do is have performance zoning, and have a design code where you're just, instead of delineating uses for different parts of town, you're saying, okay, this is the form that we want development to take. So if you want the buildings to be close to the street and not have the parking lot in front, you just, show a diagram saying, on this street, the buildings will be up on the street, there'll be a sidewalk, and they'll have, multi-layered, multi-level. So you can pretty much tweak a lot of the form through your regulations, but you have to do it in a visual way, and you have to get some design help to put that together. So that's a really useful tool. Design review is a mechanism that a lot of communities use. My experience with it is that it can keep bad stuff from happening, but it doesn't necessarily make good stuff happen. The thing that really is a catalyst for good design is to have a couple of high-quality designs happen in your town so that everyone can see, okay, that's what we're talking about, and the people that come after, there's a standard that's been set. So I would, try to attract some really good developers that use great architects and landscape architects and put them to work in your town, and then you have something in the ground that you can point to and say, this is what we're talking about.
And Steve, also another follow-up question for you. How do developers respond to these kind of regulations? How do developers respond to things like form-based codes that Julie talked about?
I think, the idea of a municipal form-based code, that's still a new idea generally. And so I think there's some developers, they're just not used to it yet. They're still kind of digesting it. To the extent that that emphasis is being placed on urban design and form over actual, other requirements like your land use and your density and things like that, I think they often find that residential developers especially probably don't have much of a problem with that. On the commercial side, it can be a little more difficult. And I do want to say, one point I didn't make earlier is that we talked about the importance of having good design to generate the value and to keep the value. It's not just the design of the residential. The commercial that those places are in proximity to and the walking environment also needs to have that same level of quality of design. Your basic dumpy strip mall, with a parking lot in front is not going to have the same value generating power for any kind of residential, let alone something that might be a multifamily project that would be within walking distance. I think, in the Houston area, we actually have some good examples of where the even relatively strict design standards, we're not talking about, zoning, it's the design standards that might be contained within it, have generated value and provided examples for others. The Woodlands was kind of one of the early pioneers of this, and they've been very strict. Sometimes they've had to face a lot of demands from developers to say, no, this isn't the way we want to do it, so relax them so we can do what we want. And they said no. And yet somehow they were able to blossom and become, this powerhouse community, even with that kind of strict regulation. And successive generations of master plan communities in the Houston region have really become stronger and stronger and stronger with their design features and the accompanying standards that have followed. And those are privately promulgated through deed restrictions and how the developer conceives the community. They're doing that on their own. They don't have to. There's a basic level of standards. If you're outside the city of Sugar Land and in the Houston ETJ, you have to comply with the Houston Basic Subdivision Ordinance. And I'll tell you, that ordinance, when it comes to design standards, is not one that I would necessarily recommend emulating for the most part. And they've gone, to a much higher level, knowing that that's what helps create success for them and generates value for the residents and helps them sell more homes and at higher prices. So I think you've already have evidence of that in the Houston region.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one final question. I'll note there are many questions in this pile that we are out of time to ask. I also noticed there were quite a few questions in here talking about walkability and traffic, and that's actually the topic for our next forum, so stay tuned for that one. But one closing question. If you look at Sugar Land today, what's the biggest challenge that Sugar Land faces in terms of being able to develop a mix of housing choices and keep those successful over the long term?
Well, one thing that concerned me was this lack of focus in a specific area, that unless you kind of steer this density and multifamily and more proximity of, mixed uses into a few, one or two or maybe three locations, it's just going to be dissipated, and you're not going to get that critical mass of people together, and you're not going to get points that you can feed with transit at a later date. Because in the long run, I think we all need to be kind of thinking about the 30 years from now. Are we all going to be, able to be driving around in our own cars? Do we want to have some sort of system that's going to work for us in the next generation? And that's not going to work if we're just kind of spread out. So you really need to kind of focus on, what are the locations that might be served by transit that can have this coherent plan that really kind of grows over time. And I'm not sure that you've got that yet. So I think that should be part of this discussion, this planning process, is, identifying those locations and really working on them.
Yeah, I think to echo what Julie just said, having right now the city doesn't have to, in order to, provide this diverse range of housing types. I haven't gone through your entire zoning code, but I understand that things are heavily approved through the PUD process. And while there's some benefits to that type of process, it would really be much more helpful if you made a deliberate effort to, in your policies, to be very explicit about, well, hey, we want to have a range of housing types, but they need to be done in a manner that takes advantage and captures the value of those other things that we've been talking about. The proximity and the walkability, that's what's going to make those uses more attractive to a developer to develop, as well as make those uses hold value over time, so that even as those things age, every building ages, right? So you have to reinvest over time. Well, the ones that can capture that kind of value are the ones that are more likely to get the reinvestment, or in some cases, even if they're not even decrepit, they can get redeveloped, when you've really got a lot of value generation going on. So I would say the most important thing you can do is just have explicit city policies that say, hey, we welcome a diverse range of housing types. Just make them adhere to these kinds of design principles, quality construction principles, and locational principles. And I think that your odds of success, you've got a great start with a lot of stuff in Sugar Land, your job base, your school districts, your commitment to civic cohesion is really admirable. And so, I think if you really just had an explicit policy to encourage it and have good design and location principles, that success will continue even as you develop other types of housing.
I think the power of that locational energy and decision making is exemplified this place we're in right now. There was a lot of shopping going on here, but putting the town hall in here just turned it into a much stronger sense of the middle of town. And so now this place has some, more gravitas and more a different kind of energy here. And, if you add other types of uses, I think people probably think about this as the heart of the community. And so you can sort of make this happen in other places, or you can strengthen this one and turn it into something even more. So, that is in your hands, and I think you should seize the opportunity to do that.
Okay, everybody give Julie and Steve a hand. You have been sitting here listening, but you are actually the residents of Sugar Land who need to have a voice in what actually happens here. So what we have set up just down the hall is actually some tables for you to gather and look at some of these photos that you've seen here tonight and tell us what you think.